Welcome to Out of the Woodwork. Thanks for dropping by. I'm Tommy, and today I'm going to show you how to build this round table. I'm starting with the tabletop, and its final thickness is going to be 1.5 inches. So I'm going to resaw these at the bandsaw at about 2 inches. That'll give me plenty of room to go to the joiner and the planer and get these flat and square. I was provided these shipping skids, which I think are mostly Douglas fir. They're all a little bit different, but you can tell by the end grain that they all come from the very center or the pith of the tree trunk or a big branch. I did an entire video on choosing wood for your project and the different types of wood, different ways they can be cut, and how they act when you build with them. So go check that out after this video. The link will be down below. The client really wants some cracks and knots in the final product, but I need to stabilize those with epoxy to make sure they don't get worse. And it can be hard to work with lumber like this in general because the center of the tree just has so much tension. So I've got to choose the cuts I use carefully, and then during glue up make sure it's held down perfectly flat. If you look at the plan I've got for this project, you don't have to glue up a perfect square for a round table. And actually the outside pieces are quite a bit shorter and then get progressively longer towards the middle. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut these to about 2 inches longer than their final length to make them a little bit easier to handle. And then after everything is milled up and flat and square, it'll get glued up. The blank is all glued up. Now, if you want to know in detail how I'm going to cut this tabletop out, check out my previous video. I'll link that up in the corner. And I create a simple router jig that cuts perfect circles, and there's also a free plan for that jig, so go check that out. After I cut the tabletop out, we'll move on to the base. So for the base, we're going to start with the 2 pedestal feet. Now I've milled these up to 3.5 by 4 inches, and they're going to be joined with a half lap. So that means we're going to cut a dado into the bottom of this one and into the top of this one, and then those will just fit together and it'll be flush across the top. Now, I'm going to cut these out on a dado stack on the table saw, but I'm going to cut them short of what they need to be so that I can come back with a chisel and get a really nice accurate edge. So I started by marking the halfway point along the length of this board and the halfway point along the width of this board and lining those up and then using that to mark the outside boundaries. Now when I take this to the table saw again, I'm going to cut inside of those lines and then sneak up on it with the chisel to get a really close fit. And once we get this nice and cut out the way we want it, we'll go back and use that to mark the dado on the top piece. The depth on this board is not as important as the depth on this board will be. So I'm going to go right to the line and cut that one out. But then when I get to this board, I'm going to sneak up on the depth of this one until it sits perfectly flush with the top of this workpiece. The feet are done for now, and I've milled up 4 pieces to be the legs, and they're sitting in about the position they're going to wind up being in, except I'm going to lean these back at about a 10-degree angle and join them with mortise and tenons. Now the way I'm going to do this is just a normal mortise that's straight up and down, and then I'm going to take the leg to the table saw and cut out a tenon at a 10-degree angle and then cut off the edges so that it slides straight down into that mortise even though the leg is at a 10-degree angle. So the leg edge will fit flat against the feet and that tenon will go straight down into the mortise. So now I've got to measure and mark the exact position of the legs and the mortises and then drill out the mortises. Then I'll take the legs over and cut those tenons and get all of that fitting right. We're making progress on the base. I've got the legs fit with mortise and tenons, and then they've been cut to length with 10-degree angles to fit flat to the bottom of the tabletop. So now to tie all the legs together and give this a lot more support, I'm going to create 2 braces that are half-lap together, and they'll be joined to the legs with mortise and tenons. So they get a 10-degree angle to match the other angles on the leg, and then the tenon will go in the edge of the braces, and the mortise will go here in the side of the leg. Before I glue this back together and stain it, the client wants it to stay rustic like this with the checking and the cracks and the holes in the top and the base, but I can't leave it like that or else it'll continue to crack and break down. So to stabilize it, I'm gonna mix up some clear epoxy and fill in all the holes and the cracks to stabilize it and then sand it down, and then I can continue on with assembly and the stain and finish. Also, before I glue up, I need to figure out what to do about the ends of these legs. Now the client doesn't want anything too ornate, but I don't want to leave them completely square, sharp square like this. So I might just do a simple round over, maybe a little bit more of a round over than I usually do, and see what that looks like. Now once that's done and then all of the gaps are filled and the epoxy's dry and sanded down, then we can glue it up and finally move on to the stain. I've decided to stain all the pieces before I assemble the base, so I'll go ahead and do that, and the only parts that won't get stained are the parts that get glue. I've said this before, but whenever you're finishing wood, all sides need to be sealed, and that's because wood takes on and releases moisture throughout the year, and you want all sides to take on and release moisture evenly. If I only stain and seal the top of this table, for example, and leave the bottom open raw wood, the bottom is going to take on and release moisture much quicker than the top. So during the winter time, I have a flat tabletop, and all of that moisture is evaporating much quicker from the bottom, and the bottom is contracting much quicker than the top, and you could wind up with a cupped tabletop. Stain is a good wood sealer, so I don't need to put clear coat on the bottom as well. I'll put clear coat on the tabletop and then on the base pieces that are visible. After the stain is applied and the base is all glued up, I'll put 3 coats of oil-based polyurethane on the base and then double that and put 6 coats on the tabletop, since it gets a lot more traffic and abuse. I allowed for wood movement when I attached the tabletop. So the grain is running this way, which means throughout the year it's going to expand and contract this way. So I need to keep from fastening the table down where it can't expand this way. The only place that I really locked the table down onto the base was right down the very middle, and that's because it expands and contracts from the middle, so that can be secure. Then I use figure 8 fasteners and put them in line with the grain so that as this expands and contracts, that fastener will swivel and allow for that wood movement. If you'd like to build a table like this, look down below. There's a link to land. If you like videos like these, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.